So class, we've talked a lot about how connected food chains are this week and how the flow of energy really can affect the size of the population of organisms in an ecosystem, right? Well, today we're going to take that just one step farther and talk about something called limiting factors. Limiting factors are resources or environmental conditions that have a direct impact upon the growth or the decline of a population. If there's more of this resource, there will be a larger population. If there's less of it, there will be a smaller population. Think about photosynthesis in a plant, for example. Anybody remember what the main components were? The reactants? Well, sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide, right? Well, let's say there hasn't been rain for a really long time. And there's a little creek in the woods that just totally dries up. Plants around that dried up creek, now having much less water to compete for, will have a much harder time getting the water that they need. Because of this, many of those plants simply will not be able to get the necessary amount of water, and they will likely die. It's a perfect example of how a limiting factor can affect the growth or the decline of a population in an ecosystem. Now, on the other hand, if it rains a ton in an area that's normally really dry, and plants have access to way more water than they used to, the population will probably increase because way more plant offspring will be able to get the water they need to survive and will be able to survive and in turn make even more of their own plant offspring. You get it? Now, it's also very important to remember that there are more limiting factors than just resources, as anything that affects the population of an organism by simply being there or simply not being there is a limiting factor. For example, disease can definitely be considered a limiting factor. If the population is very diseased, if they're, spreading that communicable disease to each other, the population will most definitely decline because a lot of them will become diseased and probably die. Populations in nature, which is the most natural state of being, nature usually balances its populations out based on the natural limiting factors present in an ecosystem. When humans drastically affect these limiting factors, however, nature often has a hard time balancing these populations out, sometimes throwing off the entire ecosystem. In this picture, for example, you can see humans cutting down lots and lots of trees. Now, a decline in the amount of trees could be a limiting factor because, as we discussed in our food web conversations earlier this week, reducing the amount of trees in an ecosystem drastically affects the amount of food and energy that is available for all kinds of other organisms in that ecosystem. Pretty crazy, right?